Okay, are we ready? Am I waiting for a cue? That was the cue. Very good, we're off and running. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this session on sustainability. På godt norsk har vi kalt det dette digital dugnad for grønn vekst. A very fitting topic for today. And for the days that will follow. I'm Kimberly Lein-Mathisen, I'm the General Manager for Microsoft Norway, and it's my great pleasure to kick off the event today with a short introduction. So the context for this discussion, I think, has become really clear for all of us. Our planet's really at a tipping point. We get more and more knowledge, and then we get more and more serious predictions that have catapulted this issue to clearly be one of the most important or dominant global issues of our times. And I think that applies to today and certainly for the coming decades. For the tech sector itself, sustainability is an issue that in fact cuts both ways. Of course, we see data consumption, data generation, data storage and processing really growing across the world, and that's not going to change now. For providers like Microsoft, who operate a very large data center footprint that powers the cloud, this is clearly an issue when we think about our growing electricity consumption. So for companies like mine, this requires us to move very decisively into much more renewable energy and into solutions which are much more energy efficient and to a whole lot of innovation to deliver all of that and more. But really, that's just the tip of the iceberg, because if you're any company in any sector, you will think about your usage of technology in terms of its electrical consumption as one element of your mix. But undoubtedly, as a company looks across its entire value chain, there will be many big issues that need to be addressed in terms of a carbon footprint across that entire value chain. And so that terrain is in fact the other side of the story, where the tech sector in fact should be taking a leading role, because we can take a leading role. And when we think about it more and more, to solve the issues that we need to solve, we are going to have to get people and data up out of the silos that they have been living in for a very long time. What we're looking for is really systems change. And we have to use a lot of the technologies, the data-driven insights, the artificial intelligence. Those are going to be some of the very most important tools that are going to help us to do just that, to create insight on an entirely different level, to unite that insight and really be able to make a systems level difference. And while it's true that carbon issues attract most of the attention these days, we also see that, of course, climate issues are far more broad than that, reaching into topics that are very multifaceted, including water, waste, biodiversity, and ecosystems. And so insights, data, artificial intelligence, and moreover, mindset, people, passion, commitment, it's going to take all of that and much more to address these in their breadth. I'm delighted to say that Microsoft came out in recent months with a very bold agenda for sustainability and set goals that make me on a personal level very proud. So we have said that we're going to be carbon negative by 2030. And I would say that the negative word is actually a word that in itself dictates a number of investments and a number of actions that I think are required and very good and very ambitious as well, that we and others will be engaged in. We've also committed to take the equivalent of all of the carbon out of the atmosphere that we've put in. Delighted to be joined by a very impressive panel. We'll get to that in just a moment. But we have 3 CEOs with us today, Nina, Stefan, Håkon. Each of you has a very interesting position, a position of great insight because of the entities you are CEOs and leaders for today, what you've done before. You're also in positions of great impact. And so we look very much forward to hearing your views and how we're all gonna get on with having that impact. But before you take the stage, it is my great pleasure to introduce Microsoft's Chief Sustainability Officer, Lucas Joppa. So if you want to talk about a position in the world where you're carrying a rather large opportunity to have an impact, but Lucas, a rather large responsibility, it must be said as well. Here's a man that we'll be delighted to hear from. So Lucas from Redmond, from Washington, where I think you are today. We're incredibly happy that you could join us today. And without further ado, Lucas, then I'm happy to say the floor is yours. Most welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the introduction, Kimberly. Thanks for everybody for showing up to listen today. I'm most excited about the panel myself, so I'm looking forward to getting to that and to that discussion. I think before that, I'll just offer a few words, a little bit about where we are, the way Microsoft sees the world, the risks and the opportunities, and then the way that we are moving forward. And I hope that that will allow us to have a meaningful conversation with the panel over the coming hour as well. And so as you heard, my name is Lucas Joppa. I'm the Chief Environmental Officer at Microsoft, and I have the burden and the privilege of overseeing all of our sustainability work. And today, I just wanted to offer a few thoughts about the two aspects of the two ways that we really look at this topic. We look at kind of the issue of digital, because we are, of course, a cloud and AI company, and we look at green and green growth because we see that as imperative for what the world needs to do to move forward. We need to be able to continue to grow our economies and the overall human experience, but we need to do that in a way that breaks the fairly destructive, environmentally destructive cycle that our overall global society has been on for the past 150 years, where we've basically been borrowing from our environmental future to pay for our economic present. And that is a relationship, that's a destructive relationship that we fundamentally need to change. And we need to change it quite quickly if we are going to avert the worst socioeconomic and environmental impacts of a rapidly changing climate and overall environmental system. And I'm not going to spend too much time on the doom and gloom. I think we all probably have a little bit too much of that in our lives. But I do want to set the stage for the severity and the magnitude of the problem that we have to address. And at Microsoft, as I'll talk about in a minute, we really look at the overall environmental landscape and the sustainability landscape through the lens of four key focus areas of carbon, water, waste, and species, and biodiversity and the ecosystems that they support. And everybody has their favorite statistics. These are kind of the statistics that get me motivated and get me out of bed every morning. And I thought I'd just describe them a little bit. 420 gigatons, 420 billion tons of carbon. That's what we have left in our global carbon budget if we are going to stay below the widely recommended 1.5 degrees Celsius temperature increase from a global average surface temperature perspective. 420 billion tons of carbon. That sounds like a lot. Until you realize that we're spending about 42 billion tons a year, which means that we have about 10 years at current rate to get our carbon emissions under control. We talk about that a lot, but there's other issues as well. So water, over the coming decades, particularly because of the destabilization of our climate system, there's expected to be up to a 55% gap between water availability and water demand in water-stressed regions around the world. From a waste perspective, we are producing over 11 billion tons of waste every year. I know in Norway, certain aspects of waste, like plastic waste, are incredibly important, particularly in marine ecosystems. Back about 50 years ago, we produced something like 1.5 million metric tons of waste every year as a global society. Last year, we produced 300 million metric tons, about half of that intended for single use only. And over 25%, and that's probably an underestimate, of species on Earth are threatened with extinction. And so when I think about numbers like that, that's what worries me. That's what gets me out of bed. That's what gets me to work every day, to think about how every organization can be their best and bring what they're best at to solve some of these challenges. I happen to work at Microsoft, so we'll talk about the digital opportunities there. But just to put this into context and the climate bit into context, I come from a scientific background. My academic background is in environmental science, and had the opportunity to lead environmental and computer science research programs at Microsoft for many years before taking on my current role. And I spend a lot of time staring at this graph with the red squiggly lines on it, because what that shows is the overall parts per million of CO2 in our atmosphere every year. And you can see that it just is relentlessly increasing, about 2 to 2.5 parts per million every year. We've gone from about 275 parts per million to 416 parts per million. And the big scientific question is the sensitivity to our climate. How much will our overall temperature increase if we double, with a doubling of our parts of our CO2 in the atmosphere? And we don't have a lot more time to figure that out. And we are, as I've mentioned before, rapidly spending our budget. If you look at this this figure on the other side of the screen, you can see this just relentless rise in CO2 emissions in the face of some extremely important societal events, everything from the World Wars, Spanish flu, the Great Depression, the energy shocks, and the 2008 financial crisis. You can see just how little of an impact some of those global events actually had on the CO2 emissions that our economy produces. And so when you look at that, you realize what we are up against. And then you also step back and you look at what we're currently in the middle of with our COVID-19 crisis and the global shutdowns that our economy has seen as a result of that virus. And what you see is some pretty significant CO2 emissions and other greenhouse gas emissions reductions. So one of my favorite statistics is the world, those economies that were all locked down simultaneously. And for that month of April, year on year, we saw a 17% drop in CO2 emissions. So at the height of one of the most economically devastating lockdowns, we saw a 17% drop in emissions. So 17% is about twice what we will have to do every decade moving forward to achieve a net zero carbon economy by 2050. So you can see just how difficult that will be. And you can see that individual choices and economic choices can have an impact on CO2 emissions and a meaningful impact on CO2 emissions, but that we still haven't quite figured out a way to do that without ruining kind of the economy and social systems at the same time. So we understand both sides of the equation. What we need to figure out is a way to balance those two things out so they don't negatively impact each other, but actually positively complement one another. And these graphs are just from a paper that came out in Nature Climate Change a few days ago, so I thought I'd put these in here. But I just wanted to highlight the opportunity, because the title of the talk is about green growth. And I want to highlight the opportunity that we have ahead of us as we think about economic recovery coming out of the COVID crisis. And really just, I'm not going to go into the details here, but just focusing on the opportunity here. If you look at that blue line or the green line there, what you can see is that if we just go back to business as usual, all of the economic pain that we have gone through from our COVID response will be for nothing. From a CO2 emissions reduction perspective, that it will just be another tiny blip on the radar screen of our overall historic CO2 emissions. If we take a fossil fueled recovery out of that, it will be even worse than a business as usual approach. But if we think about being intelligent from a green stimulus, from a low environmental impact recovery perspective, we have the opportunity right in front of us now to fundamentally shift our economic growth trajectory and its relationship with the environment in a way that we'd never been able to before. And at Microsoft, we think that the digital technologies of today and digitization has the potential to lead to one aspect of how we will need to achieve this at a global scale. And that's really through a dematerialization of our physical resources, through the digitization of our physical resources, an optimization of our physical resources, and using those optimized resources to grow our social and societal systems maximally while minimizing our negative impact on our natural systems. And that we need to ensure that that digitization of our physical systems is all powered by new forms of low and no carbon energy. And so at Microsoft, we really stepped back earlier this year, asked ourselves how we could accelerate our contribution to that larger vision, and agreed to really, as I said, focus on these 4 areas of carbon, water, waste, and ecosystems to ensure that each of those 4 areas we are building and operating and managing an end of life, our products and our facilities in line with what the best available science says, that we're deploying our current products and services and innovating new products and services in line with sustainability solutions, that we're going out and partnering directly with customers around the world to ensure that we can put our technology in their hands collaboratively to lower their overall environmental impact, and that we can use our voice in the policy arena to ensure that robust regulations are put in place that require everybody to not just make voluntary commitments, but for all of us to ensure that we're working on these challenges together. We started a strategy of setting industry-leading commitments back in January by making the first of what will be 4 sustainability announcements over the 12 months since we started. You heard a little bit about our carbon announcement that we came up with in January, an ambition, a commitment to be carbon negative by 2030, to remove all of the emissions that Microsoft has been associated with creating since we were founded in 1975, and to and then to put in place many other smaller component pieces, like ensuring that our entire global business is powered by direct renewable energy agreements by the year 2025, or completely electrifying our campus fleet systems, and other aspects, all the way down to ensuring that we're removing all diesel backup power generation for our data centers in our global facilities. And in doing that, by putting a price on carbon inside of our company. So consumption, or even more indirectly emitted through our supply and value chains. We also focus on ecosystems by committing to protect and preserve more land than we directly use around the world, and also building a planetary computer, a new digital platform for bringing together the world's largest environmental data sets, Microsoft's machine learning and AI capabilities and services, as well as a gathering of providers and consumers of environmental digital services. And then just last week, we committed to operating as a zero waste company by 2030, in large part by focusing on the reuse and repurposement and recycling of servers inside of our data centers, but also focusing on consumer devices, like ensuring that our growing Surface lineup of products is 100% recyclable. And then next month, we will culminate our overall sustainability sprint through the year by releasing our final commitments in the area of water. And so that really puts us on path to ensure that Microsoft is building itself as sustainably as possible. And then what we've already started moving into, but you'll see a lot of movement over the coming year, is how we work directly with customers to help achieve their sustainability goals. And I kind of put that in the category of ensuring that if our platforms are built as sustainably as possible, then all of our customers get those outcomes by default. But we also want to be able to ensure that customers who desire to optimize their platform capabilities for low environmental impact can do so above and beyond the default offerings, and that they have the opportunity to work directly with Microsoft to design new solutions as well. And so one of my favorite examples, particularly in the Norway context, is with Agder Energy, which one of the more inspirational examples that's happened, I think, from a partnership perspective, was a smart grid pilot that we worked on together, and we'll hear a little bit more about this, I'm sure, in the panel session, ensuring that the rapidly growing EV fleet on the roads of Norway are able to grow while minimizing the demand on the existing grid by being more intelligent with the grid, by using a more intelligent cloud and connecting all of the energy provisioning and generation with energy consumption in a more dynamic, intelligent way. And I'm looking forward to having that conversation in the panel. And then last, I would just say that Microsoft, this is not something that we are going to do alone. We already heard that we don't have all the answers on how to do this. I do believe that one of the fastest way to get those answers is to come together with other companies that have equally significant commitments, that are equally motivated to work in this space. It's why last month we announced a new coalition that we were joining and forming, called the Transform to Net Zero Coalition, with 9, including Microsoft, of the companies in the world with the most ambitious net zero or carbon negative commitments, and a work plan to come together to not just share best practices, which is fantastic, but to actually put together playbooks for all companies in the world to help them not just figure out how to make meaningful commitments, but how to achieve them as well. And so that's a work stream that I'm extremely excited about moving forward over the coming year. And just to end this, I would say that a lot of people ask us why Microsoft is doing this, and so many of you are already familiar with Microsoft's overall mission to empower every individual and organization on the planet to achieve more. But we do that through a profit-driven model. But a profit-driven model that's focused on solving problems of people in the planet for a particular reason. And that's because we believe that for Microsoft to do well, we need the world to do well. And it's so clear, if you pay attention to the best available science and to current events, that if we don't break that negative relationship between environmental degradation and economic growth, that the world ultimately won't do well. And so from a Microsoft perspective, we're motivated by that to ensure the world does well, so that Microsoft can do well, and that every individual and every organization on the planet can do well. And with that, I'll just say thank you, and I'm looking forward to the panel discussion, and I'm sorry I wasn't able to be there in person.
Thank you so much, Lucas. We're in Norway, so it's by first name only. So, but I want to introduce the rest of the panel. So with me is Nina Jensen. She spent 15 years as inside of WWF. Last several years as their CEO, so many of you are very familiar with her take on it. And I want to start, after a quick introduction of you, of course, I want to start with a question. How many companies would have a position such as Lucas and a story to an audience such as this, as he has now presented? Today.
I would say they're in a pretty unique position. I haven't heard of anyone making such remarkable commitments as they have. And not just covering climate change and also accounting for historic emissions, but daring to make commitments that they don't have the answers to how they will achieve. And not just thinking about climate change, but also thinking about sustainability, biodiversity, and every aspect of their business footprints.
And after having spent 15 years in World Wildlife Fund, you were asked by one of the leading Norwegian businessmen to take leadership in Rev Ocean. Why that transition from the NGO sector over to the private sector, or at least partly private sector?
Well, I must admit that it was a challenging transition, and it wasn't an easy decision to make. But having spent 15 years on conservation in one of the biggest conservation organizations in the world, I also saw that things are moving too slow. So even though we are achieving a lot, we're not achieving enough. And we really need to be working differently, with different mindsets, with different capabilities, and also get access to a lot more funding to achieve what we need. And of course, then being able to pair up my enthusiasm and passion for conservation with a billionaire who has pretty much always succeeded at the business ventures that he's set out to, who's not just a capitalist but also an industrialist. I saw that as a perfect match. And when he shares my ambition that one of the really key things that we need to solve is saving life in the ocean, then the decision was easy.
Moving on to Stefan Syvertsen, you're now heading up what a decade ago used to be a regional power supplier in Norway. Now Agder Energi is a leading renewable company. How is that transition in line with what we now heard Lucas say?
I think I have to start with I'm really impressed by not only talking about being carbon neutral in going forward, but also to taking the responsibility for what they have released of carbon footprint for the last 30, 40 years. That is very impressive, and I have not heard that from many before. For us, it's been very, very important to kind of base our development on the unique hydropower that we already have. And Norway, we have a unique competitive advantage, because I think we should be one of the only countries in the world that have more renewable energy than what we can use ourselves. And for us then to work with that history together with new customers and partners like Microsoft and develop new solutions for the future, I think that is a competitive advantage that has been underestimated for a number of years. And the example that we heard from Lucas here, of course I'm very happy that he took that example, is an example on how we can work between the business silos, as we heard from Kimberly in the start, to create new sustainable opportunities for us, for the society, and also for the customers. So them, of course, a lot bigger than us, but we are also working with big Nordic players like IKEA, Carlsberg, DNB, and Tesla to develop and deliver renewable energy and sustainable solutions for them. And it is growing, and I think there are a lot of opportunities, not just for us, but for Norway as a nation. And we really need politicians that see that opportunity, not just talk about it, but also fuel that development going forward.
Indeed. And Håkon, you used to be a politician only for a brief period of time before you entered into Abelia, so an organization for businesses inside the tech and knowledge sector. And now you're heading up Innovation Norway. Yes. How do you see what was just presented in line of where you come from as one of the most important Norwegian players in helping out Norwegian businesses take a foothold of tomorrow?
It's impressive and admirable what Microsoft does as a company, but it's even more impressive and important what Microsoft does with and for other companies. The role as a catalyst to create change, I think Microsoft is really showing that that can be done in an ecosystem way, and I'll try and elaborate a bit on that. This whole event, which makes the connection between digital and sustainable, I think is really a key topic. We see in our portfolio that digital technologies are the key enablers of the kind of solutions that we need a lot more of to deal with climate change. So I want in this discussion also we talk about Norway's role in this. As a country, we have, as my colleague here just pointed out, a lot of advantages. We can really be a front runner globally if we pull our pieces together in an appropriate way. We've already shown with electrical vehicles that we can be the kind of laboratory that the world needs. But given our access to things like renewable energy, which we are 100% covered by, we also have a digitally forward-leaning population, and we have robust institutions and politicians that can make investments. And this makes us unique, and we need to take advantage of that, and my personal sense is we are not moving fast enough at all. And the generation that I belong to, I recently turned 50, have a lot to answer for, and we need to step up our game and make sure that we leave this world in a state and the Norwegian economy in a state that's different from the current state.
I would just say you definitely don't look 50.
Well, thank you. I was looking for that kind of feedback.
Lucas, I want to return to you. So two other companies here you have a cooperation with. How important are cooperation with other companies for Microsoft?
Well, I think absolutely critical. I think the issue really for us, and the reason I actually came to Microsoft as an environmental scientist in the beginning, was because of Microsoft's business model, this ecosystem of customers and partners that has really been the foundation of how Microsoft operates since it started. For us, I mean, I come from a theoretical ecology perspective, right? And I think from an evolutionary time scale, the most resilient complex system is one that uses the same business model as Microsoft. So I think that that's both incredibly important from a business perspective, but when it comes to solving some of these larger sustainability and societal issues, it becomes even more important. Because I think one of the things that I look at is when we went back to our January commitment, we were able to deploy $1 billion in this new climate innovation fund. $1 billion is a lot of money. But when you look at the scale of the financial needs that we have to solve our climate crisis, $1 billion isn't even a perceptible drop in the bucket. And so what that just shows for me is no matter how big you operate, no matter what scale you operate at, Microsoft operates at one of the largest scales of any company in the world, you're still inconsequential as a solo operator. And so we have to figure out how to partner with the companies that are the Microsofts of the world and all the way down the chain to ensure that what they are able to do, the services they're able to bring all the way down to the end user, end up driving more sustainable outcomes. That's the opportunity. It's also the challenge. Because what you're saying is you have to figure out how to work with all of the organizations in the world to solve one of the world's biggest challenges. And that's the weight of responsibility that sits on us, but quite frankly sits on all of our partners as well, for all of us to figure that out together. I think that Transform to Net Zero coalition that I mentioned is a good start. Because you start by looking at some of the organizations that are motivated to do this, but you've got to look beyond just a few of the major players, and you've got to figure out how everybody comes together in this.
Nina, I want to return to you in the sense that the oceans are a vital part of the entire ecological system. And when we spoke yesterday, we talked about the fact that 40% of life underwater has disappeared in just a few decades. How important are data in coming towards your vision as a company with one healthy ocean? Just give us a little insight into how you work and the importance of data.
So first I want to just highlight the importance of the ocean, because the ocean provides us with pretty much everything that we need for our existence. Provides us with 50 to 80% of the oxygen that we breathe. It regulates our climate, is an essential food source for more than 1 billion people all over the world, and provides a multitude of jobs. And I would even go as far as saying that the ocean may hold the solutions to most of the sustainability challenges that the planet is faced with today. So it's kind of surprising that we're treating it as a massive waste dump. But thankfully, we do know a lot about the ocean. We do know what many of the solutions are, and there are millions of data points out there that could point us in the right direction. The challenge is that a lot of these data points are sitting in individual silos. They're not openly shared. They're sitting in locked into reports or computers where nobody really has access to them. So what is really needed is a data revolution where all of this data is put to good use, basically, combined in useful ways, using also artificial intelligence and other sorts of digital tools to make better understanding of it, and of course making it more readily available to the general public. And this is why in RevOcean we established an independent foundation and platform called the Ocean Data Platform, where this is our exact goal: to combine all the data that exists all over the world connected to the ocean and bring this together in new meaningful ways and enable decision makers and ocean enthusiasts from all over the world to get access to this data. This means that we can both develop solutions quicker, we understand better what is going on, and we can hold decision makers accountable whether they're making the right or wrong decisions.
And is that easier done with cooperations?
Cooperation is essential. I mean, you will not be able to do it without cooperation. And that's why, of course, Microsoft, their AI for Earth program, as an example, is an ideal partner for such a program. And of course, working with companies that share our ambitions of really making a systemic change to some of the challenges we're facing, whether it's climate change, illegal fishing, plastics in the ocean, that's the kind of partners that we need. So you will not be able to solve any of the sustainability challenges in this world without partnering.
I must admit, and a moderator is supposed to be entirely neutral, but I must admit I felt a little proud when I saw Agda and Ashi on Lucas's presentation. Why do you think he put it up there? Why was it a part of his presentation? And give us a little insight to what it is and the implications of it.
I think the history around the example that Lucas had here is very interesting. It actually started with some of the most experienced people that we have in our organization that took the travel to San Francisco. And we met the global head of energy in Microsoft. And I was also then quite young, but the most experienced guys that we had with us, when he started to talk and show the knowledge that he had around the energy system, the full value chain, Larry Cochran, who was the name of the Microsoft guy, it really opened his eyes. And I think we also have underestimated there the knowledge that we in Norway and in the Nordics have had around the energy system. We developed the first power trading exchanges, and now we have a new opportunity, and that's what this example is about, to create new marketplaces where we put together the different parts in a new renewable energy system that is a lot more complex than what we have today. So there you will have EVs, batteries, wind power, trading automatically on this IoT platform, And that is really needed now. Not so much in Norway actually, because we have the hydropower that we can regulate. But in Europe and all other parts of the world, where they take in a lot of more intermittent renewable energy, together with the change, having electrical vehicles and a lot of other changes at the customer side, they really need a new power system. And that's a good business opportunity for us. And that has been, it started with a small transformer station that we had in the south of Norway, and we have now developed and are having pilots in Stockholm and other parts of Europe, together with Microsoft and Nopol, the power exchange. And I really, really hope that this can be used all over the world, actually, together with Microsoft as our partner. So we're very happy for that.
Håkon, you're it's like in a middle world here because you represent the Norwegian state, maybe not as such, but in the panel you do. And also coming from Abelia from before, you really have a deep knowledge into Norwegian businesses inside the knowledge and tech sector. How future-friendly and environmentally friendly would you say Norwegian business is, and what do you do today in Innovation Norway to accelerate that?
Very good question. It's clearly the consciousness could be higher, I think, across the board. But in total, I think we have one of the most forward-leaning, environmentally aware business sectors in the world, probably. But we also have a challenge, and that is that to achieve some of our goals, we need to make a huge transition, which a lot of other economies don't have to make. It's interesting that the head of Equinor, our largest company, on assuming the position, made the point that he wants an oil and gas company fundamentally to be a green company. And that's, I think, just an example of the awareness that we have. There is no longer a discussion on whether we should continue to be a petroleum country. It is how do we make that transition and for how long do we maintain a mix. In the area that I know best, the knowledge and technology companies, I think there's also awareness about how they can enable change to a large degree, and I think Microsoft is a great example of that. And that's certainly needed, and this whole ecosystem point, I think, cannot be overstated how important that is, how it is all about interaction, not just in terms of access data, but sharing data, developing data, and then building business platforms on top of data. If we look at some of our opportunities as a country now, for instance, offshore wind, to make an effort into offshore wind for Norway is not about our own energy supply, because that's certainly taken care of by hydropower. But it is about how can we, with the technology and knowledge that we have from the oil and gas sector, make a difference in the world. And in order to achieve that goal, we need the different pieces of that ecosystem to come together. We need to understand the needs of the market. We need to be close enough to the international markets. We need to understand that when Japan decides to regulate areas for offshore wind, we need to ensure that Norwegian business is there. But we also need the different parts of that ecosystem in Norway to find each other. And then we're back to the platform point that I tried to make initially. That the technology to ensure that the players find each other and the different pieces of those ecosystems can actually fit into a holistic system is really important. And we underestimate it. We still rely on a model of business development happening by handshakes and physical meetings and identifying some kind of exhibition that we are supposed to be at. This is not how business development will be done in the future, and it's certainly not the way we can build offshore wind or hydrogen or data storage or other areas of growth in Norway. We need to totally shift our mindset, and we need to ensure that we as a country come together. We're pretty good at talking to each other in Norway, but this is also something we should do more of and build these national ecosystems that are part of international ecosystems. And it's a huge mind change, and I think for a lot of decision makers, both in companies and politically, a difficult transition to make, a difficult realization.
Yeah, you bring up a lot of interesting points, and of course both offshore wind and data centers, as you mentioned, are two great opportunities for Norway, and given that we're here speaking with Microsoft, maybe an interesting challenge to pose back to you, because obviously to run all of your operations, to store the data, you will be needing an increasing amount of data centers, but also renewable energy to power them. So maybe that could be an area of cooperation where developing offshore wind in Norway, where we have optimal wind sources and huge potential for transforming an entire energy sector from fossils to renewables, but we also have optimal areas for having data centers. You've already established at least 2, I think. Maybe that could be an opportunity for further growth and development.
Well, yeah, look, I think we are a data center company, and our data centers consume energy. And that's, and that's the issue for us. I think what's so interesting about this conversation, whether it's from hydro or wind or anything else, and particularly as it relates to some of the business transformation that we know, organizations in particular sectors like the oil and gas sector are going to go through, is our perspective. We have a renewable energy by 100% renewable energy by 2025 goal. And I think that's fantastic. But fundamentally, I don't want Microsoft to have to go procure renewable energy. I want Microsoft to just procure energy. And I want to know that 100% of the electrons coming into our facilities 100% of the time come from zero carbon energy sources. Like that, that's what motivates us. It's a sincere motivation when the folks that are leading our renewable energy teams have the exact same perspective, because those are their jobs that we're talking about. But I think that is the big opportunity. And so then the question is, when you think about data center growth, and you think about grid mix penetration and the greening of the grid, what we're constantly looking at are those partnerships, whether from the customer side and the technology side or the procurement side, to be able to ensure that our data centers get the renewable energy that they need, but that we do that in a way that fundamentally leads to a greening of the grid. Because one of the things that we are very sensitive to as a company, and I can give you a bunch of different examples of how we think about this, is that if Microsoft achieves our goals, even if it were just achieves a goal of 100% renewable energy, and we do that in a way that doesn't accelerate everybody else's ability to do it at the same time, then it's not actually a win for Microsoft, and it's definitely not a win for the world. And so we're actually oftentimes okay being a little bit slower, a year slower, 2 years slower, if it means that more people show up at the ultimate destination with us than potentially some of the other strategies that are being deployed in the tech sector for getting to some of these goals. So whether it's hydro or wind, or even carbon capture and storage from more traditional generation facilities, those are all things that I think that we need to be. I know Norway's talking about, obviously, with some of the Northern Lights work and others, that's that full portfolio mix that we need to be thinking about to get to that goal that Microsoft has, and I'm sure everybody else has, which is we just want to plug into the grid and get zero carbon electrons 100% of the time.
Håkon, you raised your hand.
Right, I was just enthusiastic about Nina's contribution regarding data centers, because I really don't understand if there's any country which is better positioned for data centers. But I also wanted to add another perspective on energy. The relationship is often more complicated than we intuitively think. A lot of us use steel. A lot of steel in the world is produced based on coal. If Norway can use excess energy, well, actually there is no such thing as excess energy, but can use renewable energy to produce aluminium sustainably, which can replace coal produced by coal. That's steel produced by coal. That's a relationship that we also need to explore. So it's all about value chains and how we look at them. And I also wanted to share, if you allow me, some observations in our client portfolio. Innovation Norway is primarily a funding agency. We provide loans and grants and guarantees to Norwegian companies. In the corona period, we've talked a lot about the shift. Is there a shift? Are we getting shock digitalized? And our numbers confirm that yes, indeed, we are. The share of projects that are digital has doubled in our portfolio, and our portfolio has actually doubled in numbers. So that's a huge shift. In addition, we see larger companies, and this is great news, in this difficult period, making long-term investments in the kind of areas we've talked about before. So there's good news there, and I think we fundamentally need to ask us the question, are we going to return to what was before, or are we going to use this as an opportunity to do something differently? And at least based on the modest numbers that we can present, there is a move to actually replace it with something different than what we left off.
Stefan, it doesn't take long in a conversation with Stefan until you revert back to ecosystems. Why are ecosystems so important to you?
I really think that to create a green and sustainable future, you will really need all of us to come together if we want to take down the carbon footprints that we have. And when we hear from Lucas today talking about the biggest global companies of the world, now really making commitments to be green, and they're working together in these ecosystems, I really get enthusiastic. And what we recently did was that we cooperated with one of the biggest capitalists of Norway, Bjørn Rune Gjelsten, and his group, now to create a sustainable new production of batteries based on Norwegian hydropower. So I really hope that we can create that opportunity for the future. And 10 years ago, it was regulation that drove renewable energy in Europe. So all the German wind and solar came because of regulations. Today, you see it's the customer and the business side. It's the capital flows that goes into the green area. So what I would like to ask Lucas here is, what kind of regulations do you think that we need on a global scale to really increase the pace to reaching the carbon neutrality that we need?
Well, that is the question, isn't it? I think I think what you'll find about Microsoft is we're quite open to different regulatory approaches that get us meaningfully down the net zero by 2050 path. Personally, I think that there's only a few specific ways. The devil's in the details in the policy always, right? But I think, ultimately there needs to be a price on the impacts that these byproducts, that these waste byproducts produce. And in the climate space, it's carbon. And I think that, whether you want to approach that from a pure pricing perspective, from a cap and trade perspective, or however else, I think we have been operating a budget without a comptroller, right? So everybody's allowed to spend whatever they want, and then we just get worried that the budget is being depleted too rapidly, and we have no levers to pull to minimize that. So whatever makes sense in both a national or regional context, I think is something that Microsoft is open to. But I think one thing that we've experienced internally is success with carbon pricing. We have a price on carbon. We've historically had a price on carbon for our direct emissions and for our electricity-based emissions. One of the most rapid step changes that we made in our ability to declare a 100% renewable by 2025 goal is we increased our price on carbon just a little bit above the incremental cost of renewable energy. And it should come as no surprise that as soon as we made that change, about 4 months later, we changed our commitment to 100% renewable energy, right? I mean, it's not rocket science. And as we then say, hey, we all are also extending our carbon negative commitment to our scope, what's called scope 3 emissions, right? Our full supply and value chain, so including product use of our hardware devices in the consumer space. We're deploying our carbon fee against all of that as well. So our procurement teams, any bid from procurement has a carbon price on it. And that drives the transparency that's needed, because it's hard to put a price on something. If your price is not transparent, your price will likely be high. You will be uncompetitive in your bid. We need, and then ultimately that revenue that raises is used to invest in carbon removal and other technologies that we need. And so, I'm not saying carbon prices work for everybody. Maybe it's cap and trade here, something, or just subsidization schemes there. I don't know. But there needs to be financial incentivization, both a carrot and a stick, I believe, to accelerate this. Because one of the other areas that we really need to figure out a way forward on are some of these kind of what you might call green premiums. The idea that, more sustainable solutions oftentimes cost more in the short term while saving money in the long term. And to be able to help organizations break that hump, basically, and say, no, we're going to figure out a way to ensure that the increased CapEx expenditure, although I guess that's redundant, the additional CapEx that you're going to face today is something that makes financial sense in the long term. That's both a kind of a subsidization play, as well as an accounting methodology change that I think would be helpful for people to take a longer term view. And that's one of the things that I think makes Microsoft relatively special in this space. We have the resources, no doubt about it, right? We're also and this sounds a little strange to some companies that have been around for hundreds of years, but from a tech perspective, we're old, right? And so we have seen kind of the long arc of history, at least from a tech timeline. And we think that far out. We make our business decisions based on Horizon 1, 2, and 3. And we make lots of investments in that space. I mean, just personally, I was brought into Microsoft and Microsoft Research, and the first thing I was told was to think 50 years out. And I remember my first meeting with my manager being scolded because he thought my idea was going to be only 20 to 25 years away. So we're a company that thinks that far out. And what's so true is that when you, in the world we live in, at the pace of digital innovation and technology adoption that's happening, the human brain is almost incapable of thinking 50 years out anymore. Because as soon as we think it, that starts a process of innovation that accelerates so quickly in our modern ecosystem that thinking something 50 years out means that it's most likely only 20. And that's how we need to start thinking about the green growth problem as well, and particularly from a financing and regulatory perspective.
Nina, shortly on the ocean, can we think 50 years ahead? Is it possible? What is life in the ocean if we continue at today's accelerated pace of just killing off ocean life?
Well, we certainly have enough data to make projections in terms of what can happen. So plastics will be filling up our ocean. We know that possibly 60% of global fish stocks will be extinct in the next 80 years unless we change our ways. And of course, they are becoming increasingly less productive, more acidic, and a lot warmer. So coral reefs, for example, will be history, just to name a few. So yes, we're able to extrapolate a potential future, but that's obviously not where we want to go or have to go. We obviously want to create a much different future. And I think that's the more both interesting discussion, but more challenging. You know, how do we actually create that future that we so desperately need. And I would agree. I think it's difficult for us to think that far ahead or even come up with all the solutions ourselves. So maybe we need the help of artificial intelligence or new kinds of technologies and solutions that are now becoming available to us to actually do that.
But how can a mixture of Norwegian enterprises such as Agder Energi, or for that matter multinationals such as Microsoft, help you in your work in saving the oceans?
Well, I think, again, partnership is key. So learning from best practice, some of the actual solutions that are taking place. How will Microsoft, for example, implement their ambitious targets? How is it translating into reality? And I think that's what would also be important for a lot of other Norwegian companies. Yes, it may be true that they're all acknowledging that this is a problem, but very few Norwegian companies have set ambitious targets like Microsoft has, or even would dare to think that way. So I think if more companies actually stepped up their game, set ambitious targets, and made roadmaps for how to actually get there, then we would be in a very, very different position than we are today. And it's always so easy to ask for more regulations and that this is the responsibility of the politicians, but we really don't have to wait for complex regulations. We can start doing it already. You know, and I love the fact that you bring up Scope 3 and that Microsoft has also decided to account for historical emissions. I mean, imagine if we were able to get fossil fuel companies to be accountable for the Scope 3 of their emissions. I mean, boom, then you would all of a sudden have solved the majority of the problem. So, I mean, it's those kind of solutions that we need, and where, you know, hopefully by using whether it's new digital technologies, more transparency of data, and other exciting technologies that are becoming available to us, we can force that development in a much more proper direction.
Is Innovation Norway leading the charge here in moving away from a petro-economy to a greener economy?
Only as a catalyst, I think, at best. It's all, I mean, obviously the responsibility of the business community and the individual company itself, but we can provide funding for change and advisory and networks, and we do that, and we certainly also could do more ourselves. I think on this point of the companies and their responsibility, I completely agree a lot more could be done. I think if commercial companies fail to act, there are at least 3 other drivers that will influence their decision making. One is the investor side, that was already mentioned. Investors will not place their money in companies, I think, over time, they do not act sustainably in the long term. The second is the customer side, and I think that's growing, and we see a lot of new business models, reusable products, obviously circular economy, etc. So that's another driver. And the third, and maybe most important, is talent. If young people don't want to work in your company, you have a fundamental problem. So I think there is that framework needs to be understood in order to also give companies an incentive to move faster.
Nina?
I also wanted to mention that recently the Aker Group in Norway, the World Economic Forum, and RevOcean launched a new initiative that we call the Center for the Fourth Industrial Revolution for Ocean. And essentially what it is looking at how new technologies that are becoming available to us can be used to reduce the environmental footprint of industries. And if we really scale up, whether it's the use of satellite technology, artificial intelligence, underwater drones, all of these different things, we could get a much better and quicker overview of where the potential problems are, where are the potential solutions, and pair these up more quickly. Again, back to partnerships, bringing together some of the stakeholders and businesses that are really leading the charge, whether it's Microsoft or others that set ambitious targets but also have the means to achieve them, I think that would give us a fighting chance of solving not just the climate problem, but also the huge biodiversity problem that we haven't pretty much touched on in this panel debate, but that is equally severe.
I want to open up to the audience in just a few minutes, so do prepare a question or two. Stefan?
What Lucas told us earlier today was that we have an enormous possibility just at this point in time, because we see that the carbon emissions has lowered together with stimulus packages that are enormous around the world. And I cannot see, to be honest, that politicians and businesses together in Norway really have ambitions. So when we look into Europe now with the new Green Deal, they have enormous ambitions. And it's not just ambitions anymore, now it's the politic as well. And Denmark, our neighbor country, they have stated that they want to use 38 billion euros to develop energy islands with offshore wind, hydrogen in the North Sea, our backyard. And we have put a couple of billions here and there, and the main thing that we did was actually to lower the taxes for the fossil industry. So I really think that we need, as a society, to step up so that we can take the possibilities that we have right now because of the stimulus packages that we have are now flowing into the economy, together with the carbon emissions going down.
Any questions? Please.
Yes, I have one question to Stefan. My name is Anders Christiansen from Treefather, and I'm not sure if you know, but I'm not sure if you know the problem. All power lines companies, I suppose around the world, but especially here in Norway, have to cut down trees to maintain to keep the power lines safe. So I'm not sure how many tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of trees it's talking about, but it's a lot. And of course that's not good for the CO2 catch. So my question is this is this something the power branch is talking about, and could it be a solution to replant or compensate with replanting in the climate forest?
So just to recap for our online audience, so coming from Treefather, we'll get a short introduction to that as we're ending today's discussion. Is it a chance of compensating, or for that matter, replanting trees being cut down when you maintain power lines?
Right.
Thank you. I think it's a great question, because we have, the last years in the area that we are based in the south, we have had, I think since the 80s, the forest has almost tripled. They're growing so fast. So it's one of the main challenges that we actually have. When there is a lot of snow coming, we have to, so we are using 100 millions every year right now to take down forests. And to then develop value propositions to use that bioenergy, because that's what it is, both to create sustainable new energy solutions here, where we are, but also to compensate that on growing trees other parts of the world. That's a great idea.
Thank you. Shall we take a talk afterwards?
Any other questions? Just a question to you, Lucas, then, in terms of attracting talent. I would imagine that a large multinational like Microsoft has no problem attracting talent as such. But are there specific issues dealing with sustainability that is now becoming more important when you do talk with potential talent into the organization? And do you see a shift in the way how new recruits in Microsoft see the company in a sustainability regard?
There's no question that talent is a huge issue to be paying attention to in the sustainability space in the private sector, particularly in the tech sector, where, yes, it's true that maybe Microsoft doesn't have the same problems attracting talent that some other organizations may, but we are in a desperate battle for talent within the sector all the time. And one of the top issues, if not the number one issue that employees raise in Microsoft and in the tech sector more broadly, is the topic of environmental sustainability. More generally, they're looking to work for corporations that stand for something, corporations that care, corporations that are aligned with their beliefs. But particularly when you drill down into that, sustainability is one of the number one issues. Inside the company, we have a worldwide community on sustainability. It was the most rapid growing and largest community inside the organization. And, you know, employees aren't afraid in the tech sector to share their opinions. And that's why we hire them, right? We are looking for the best and the brightest. And why would we ignore what they have to say when they're passionate about a particular topic? But I just really don't see at the highest level corporations being able to ignore some of these key issues and retaining top talent. And if you don't attract and retain top talent, you will not be a top corporation anymore. I mean, that's just, so these things, they come and they go. The issue is the lag. And I would argue that you will see the impact from the talent attraction and then retention and then corporate performance loop at about the same scale that we will see time scale, that we'll see how the implications of how we address our economic recovery coming out of COVID. There will be a time, probably 10 years from now, that we will look back at 2020 in particular as the critical turning point for quite a few of these issues. We will look and we will say, did we build back better? Did we build back greener? Or did we double down on a business as usual approach? It right now represents the first real opportunity that we have had globally to meaningfully address climate change. It might be the only one, although given the catastrophic consequences of a destabilized climate, I can't imagine that this would be the only crisis that we will be facing and having to deal with economically if we don't make the right choices today. I would just argue you'll see that from an employee retention and recruitment perspective. You're going to see that a decade from now as well, because that's the timeline that it takes. But corporate chiefs will look back at 2020 and around this time, and the way that they approached solving the climate crisis through the lens of their core corporate competencies, and whether they did so or didn't, and the way that they dealt with employee concerns, they will look back and wish that they had done things differently 10 years ago. So that's my prediction.
Håkon, from your perspective, are Norwegian businesses doing enough in terms of getting not only a corporate story across of how they're tackling or moving into a greener economy, but also in terms of how they are changing away from a petro-friendly economy, a carbon economy, to a carbon neutral or carbon negative economy?
Clearly not. I don't think any of us can say we do enough. And I think the fundamental question that's being asked is, will we build back better or not? And it's a responsibility all of us will have to take. I think decision makers in business and politicians and us as individuals. It also is about our individual choices. And maybe the next generation will look back at our generation and the way we look back at smoking in cars. You know, they really were smoking with small children in the car. That same reaction I think we might face from the next generation in terms of some of the decisions we've made and the way we've lived. So that's fundamentally a question. I'm glad, Lucas, you have this tone of optimism, because I don't think it's a given that we'll build back better. I think there are also a strong push to just build back as soon as possible and also compromise on some fundamental values. In this picture, I think Norway and Norwegian business can play an important role, not in Norway, but globally. And we certainly need to also step up our game on that part of it.
Your perspective on that, Nina?
Well, I think it's a very valid point, and I'm also, even though we've seen some positive shifts, and of course companies are also discovering opportunities in maybe some greener ways to run their businesses, it's easy to forget once a crisis is over and then just revert back to normal. So the challenge is, of course, to get more solid commitments firmed up from some of these companies, that they actually set very clear targets for how much they will reduce their emissions, preferably to become carbon negative, but also being transparent about the concrete measures that they will take to get there. And I think we're way off in terms of achieving that, in particular in Norway. So I think there's also a huge need for increased transparency, because there is a lot of greenwashing going around, not just in Norway, but all over the world. People talk a lot about greening their operations. They want to attract more talent, so talking about this becomes important. But if you look behind the creative speeches, it's not really being followed up by actual action. So improving transparency, I think, is hugely important, and maybe that's also an area where we can play a role through both the data platform that we're developing and also the Center for the Fourth Industrial Revolution, but maybe even Microsoft to both showcase and be open and transparent in their own operations, but maybe shine the light on others as well.
I would just
Please go ahead,
say
Lucas.
one more thing. I think that transparency piece is absolutely critical. And there has been a lot of, if you want to call it corporate greenwashing over the years, of organizations making voluntary commitments and then just not achieving them. And I think that whether or not organizations are aware of it, we are well past that point. I believe that voluntary commitments that corporations make today will be held accountable for achieving those commitments at or above the societal level of expectation as any regulatory requirement. And so what's so interesting, I think, as you see organizations across all sectors starting to make these commitments, whether they're aware of it now or not, they will have to meet those. And they will see that the pressure is if they are on path of not being transparent about their path to progress, or as they deviate away from it, those outcomes will be unacceptable from investors, from consumers, and from employees, and potentially from regulators, who will look to hold companies to account for things that they voluntarily committed to doing but weren't regulatorily required to do so. So I think we have a very different future from a societal stakeholder expectation perspective moving forward than we did in the past. And I think Microsoft's well aware of that, and I hope and ultimately know every corporation will figure that out on their path.
But is that something that Microsoft increasingly could contribute to, sort of a transparency revolution within at least the corporate sector? Maybe listing the top 100 polluters in the world, seeing what commitments they have made or not made, how much are their emissions increasing or decreasing, what are the concrete steps that are being taken, and then track that, so that would also enable people all over the world to really put their foot down, shift their purchasing practices away from these companies and so forth.
So one of the things that I think the first direct responsibility that sits on us is to be incredibly transparent about our own impacts, right? And I think that that's one of the things that we are leading on at the moment, and not just making that transparent to the world, but particularly through customers. I think one of one of the easiest, most meaningful things that we did recently was just releasing our carbon calculator so that all of our customers on Azure, our cloud, are able to immediately understand the carbon impacts of their computing on our systems, not just for their own accounting, but then through simple downloading processes to be able to take that impact and directly integrate it into their open third-party reporting through platforms like CDP or others. Then there's, I believe, a significant technology opportunity, and this is one of the things that I love about RevOcean, is we do know a lot about the problems of the world, right? We know at a broad scale the issues that the oceans are facing. We know at a broad scale the issues that our climate is facing. We still have a very long way to go to truly understand how these issues are kind of manifesting themselves in space and time. I mean, we've only discovered, probably something like 10 to 20% of all life on Earth. So I think we still have a long way to go in that respect. And being able to bring a radical transparency to the state of our planet's natural resources, to where greenhouse gas emissions are coming from, to where plastic pollution is originating from. Those are the sorts of areas where I think digital technologies from platforms like Microsoft's to organizations like RevOcean have the potential really to show where collaboration happens. Whether or not I think it's Microsoft's job to build all of that and deliver it to the world, I don't know, but I definitely think that there's a huge opportunity for Microsoft to be involved in building those solutions that collaborators around the world use to bring that transparency to bear, and hopefully in a way, and a tech-driven approach that Microsoft can use to shine a transparent light on itself as well to its stakeholders that care.
Well, that sounds like a very concrete and actionable action point to take away from this panel discussion. And I really look forward to the day when we can launch something great that shines the light on the state of the planet and holds those companies and people responsible for causing it.
I hope this panel will bring closer cooperation between the panelists and the panel companies, that we'll see more Norwegian companies step up and do like Microsoft and say 100% renewable within 2025, being carbon neutral by 2030, and offsetting all carbon emissions by 2050. Do that, we've come a long way off from where we started this panel conversation. Yeah. So thank you very much for participating.
Thank you.
A particular thank you from Lucas and the rest of the panelists. Really enjoyed talking to you all. And just as we are heading off stage, I want to leave it with Trefadder, which is a Microsoft friend as such. He has brought with him a small present, not necessarily Corona affected, but hopefully is. And he promised just to be very brief in introducing what Trefadder is. So thank you all very much.
Ja, ok, ja. Da må vi se. Best å ta meg av nå. Det er derfor jeg kommer på scenen. Skal jeg ta det på engelsk, eller? Ja. Yes, sorry. Yes, hello, my name is Anders Christiansen. I am the project leader for the Norwegian climate forest project Trefadder. And what do? We plant trees. And Norway is well known for a lot of things, but not the climate forest. But that is about to change. Trefadder has taken the initiative to, we call it Norwegian, eller Norsk Klimaskog, Norwegian climate forest. And we are planting trees across Norway together with small farms. This fixes a couple of problems. Number one is that the companies in Norway, they want to be carbon neutral, and they can do so by financing tree planting. And by doing so, they will also create local jobs in the small farms across Norway. So, and that way we have the financing. The problem is then to find the correct areas where to plant, and we don't want to plant the same trees all over Norway. We want to have biologisk mangfold, I'm sure the English word, but we want to have a good forest, yes, with different trees and everything. And to do so, we get helps from Microsoft. So we were so happy when we was granted the grant, the AI grant. And together with this grant, we will make a system which will hopefully as much possible automatically process to identify where potential good tree planting areas across Norway, and that every small farm in Norway can just like putting in the address, and the system will automatically say yes or no, or perhaps if this is a good place to plant, and then we can go out and have a more closer look. And together with the AI system, we can do this in a national scale, potentially in a global scale. So that's our mission and our goal.
Thank you. Wonderful.
And of course, I've almost forgot the most important thing. Let's see, Nina. Let's styr med den her, sånt. Maybe not the right way, but here is your evidence that we have planted trees for you, so you are carbon neutral. And here is
Wow.
for you.
I'm even a climate neutral person.
We plant tree for you. Maybe you can also take it out. And
I wonder how many trees you would have to plant for me to be climate neutral.
millions of trees, like this. And Stefan, same for you. There you go.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
And Håkon, one for you.
Thank you very
Also,
much. Thank you.
you can open it and see if we can have a good photo, maybe. It's all about marketing, isn't it?
Very cleverly done.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. Takk. Tusen takk.
And yeah, you'll have to ship one off to Lucas as well.
And for all of you following us online, thank you very much. Have a great evening.